this role in the live.
I know. Usually it's just our voices. We always joke that we have a face for podcasting.
True story.
But now I'm making you put your face live for the world to see. So yeah, first of all, I'm so excited because you and I started this partnership over a year ago now. And it's really cool to be able to fuse my two worlds, my two professional worlds. And you really came to the call and said, sure, I'll do a webinar with you. So not everyone would be that willing to say yes. And believe me, I've asked. I think it says a lot that you're willing to kind of put your information out there. And I know a real shared mission of ours is to give free, helpful, science-backed tips to people who might not otherwise want to or be able to come into session, or they might not need to. It might just be a kind of a quick thing they want some help with. So thank you.
Well, you're welcome. It's combining two things I love, definitely working with you and college students. So there are things I'm excited to have the opportunity to talk through, some skills that college students can use during this really difficult time.
Right. And we are really talking about now almost college students, this idea, and I'm sure you're seeing it left and right. I know you see tons of college students or high school students too. So it's this waiting game. It's this action and frenzy that's happening. Okay. It's like this deadline, this deadline, this deadline, this deadline. And suddenly you can't do anything else. You've hit send on all the applications. And sure, there are plenty of people out there who've already gotten their decisions, who applied early action. All right, which is great. Congratulations. That's fantastic. And there are people who didn't want to do that, or they might have gotten on a wait list. And so it's just a lot of unknowns right now. Are you seeing people come in with managing and having to tolerate like what comes next?
Yeah. I mean, I think first of all, a lot of college students, just to avoid waiting, I think do apply early action now and early decisions. So it's like a solution. I don't know if it's the best solution to the problem. But regardless, I have plenty of college, rising seniors that are really struggling with when other people know, I don't know. How am I going to handle ththese next few months? It's always a lot later, even myself, I'll be like, wait, did you find out yet? They're like, Liz, I'm not going to find out till like April.
I know. The truth is that we, as we're working with these teens, we're waiting too. We care about what the outcome is. So we're just like you, any parent listening or teen listening, we're also like, what's going to happen? So we have to use these skills ourselves. But, one of the things that we know is that waiting can be the worst. It just feels like there's a lot of inaction. So typically when people are anxious about something and they have an uncertain future ahead of them, not necessarily a bad future, but it's one that's a bit unknown, there's a lot of actions that people tend to take, right? They double check whether they got their teacher recommendations in, or you can edit your college essay that one last time. Again, not always the right coping strategy, but it certainly is something that people tend to do, is just recheck or talk with their friends about it. And it feels like at least there's some kind of problem solving that can happen. And suddenly you're waiting and there's nothing you can do. And there's not a lot of muscle that's been flexed so far in terms of, having to just sit and be.
Right. And I think the hardest part there is that when you can't make behavioral steps to kind of change or help, like you were just alluding to, that's when our mind tends to wander and go to unhelpful, worst case scenario places, and get stuck kind of in this hamster wheel of like constantly worrying about outcomes that are really unpredictable. I mean, I think it's become so unpredictable about, I always say to college students, there's certain students where I'm like, how are you going to get into that school? And then they get in. And then there's certain college students where in my mind, I'm like, you're definitely going to get into that school. And then they don't get in. Right. So
you're saying we're not great predictors.
No, we're not great predictors. But I think that this is the waiting part, is where people try to make predictions, and that causes a lot of stress that I hope we can leave today recognizing that it's avoidable. There are other things that you could be doing to deal with the uncertainty.
By the way, I don't think I told you that my daughter got a hamster from
N-
Santa.
Oh my
And
goodness.
so every time that hamster's on the wheel, I'm like, oh my gosh, now I know, because we use that so often.
I know.
And at 9 o'clock at night, it's like, I'm like, yeah, it's still a good metaphor because that guy's not stopping. Yeah. Anyway.
I love that you have a visual reminder of the
Yes.
metaphor.
I'm like, I can't get away from my job. So we hear all sorts of worries. This is clearly not an exhaustive list. What if I don't get in? How do I decide where to go if I do get into more than one? I keep playing out that worst case scenario in your head, or my friends and I both applied to the same types of places. What happens if they get in and I don't? Or the opposite. Shoot, now I've gotten in, but my friend didn't. How do I handle that? And then the funniest part, not funny, not funny, is that once the decision is made, then the worries switch. If your mind is naturally prone to worry, it can land on anything. So once you find out some certainty, you're going to go to certain college A or B, then it switches. It's like, what if it's too hard? What if I hate my roommate? What if? So the good news is that the things we're going to talk about today are truly helpful no matter what stage you're in. And even if you're not even worried about college, there might be other things about tolerating uncertain futures that these could be helpful for. Did I leave any really obvious ones off here?
I think that at least I feel like in the past 5 years or so, the cost of higher education has increased a lot. And I never really realized that you can get admitted, but then you don't find out your financial aid package till even later. So I just think the waiting even for that piece, like waiting for when are the accepted student days, like there's just so many markers that I think, even when one worry kind of gets ameliorated and you're no longer thinking about that, another one kind of pops up. And it's not just this dichotomous, did I get in or not get in? There's a lot of pieces. So I think that's the piece that I know a lot of students that I have working with now have gotten in places, but they can't kind of knock things off their list yet or kind of prioritize their list because they haven't heard how much money they're going to get from some of these schools.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that because that's a huge one. If I do get into various places, do I do a work study? Do I get so you're right. It's a breeding ground for the what if scenarios. So I think that one thing that comes up a lot, and I always try to emphasize before I even start to say, hey, let's kind of challenge some of this, is that underlying belief system about worry itself. And these might sound familiar to some. They certainly can be familiar to me. I get confused a little bit sometimes and have to check myself. But a lot of times I think, and it's the first one here and potentially the biggest one that people might be doing, is that worry is the same thing as problem solving, and you mentioned that people can sometimes start to catastrophize various scenarios. And when they do that, it's like, okay, what if this happens? Well, then I could do this. All right. And it feels like you're creating some solutions. The truth is that problem solving, and we're going to get into this later, is quite a different thing than just imagining all the worst case scenarios and kind of coming up with your emergency plan. That isn't actually problem solving. It's like a Trojan horse. It's actually rumination, just not being able to sort of get off the worry track. So that's the first myth. If I don't worry, it means I'm lazy or unmotivated. I don't know if you have any sort of, by the way, stop me if you have any sort of anecdotes to come in here, but that's sort of like, well, if I didn't worry, it would mean I didn't care, and I wouldn't have applied. I wouldn't have worked so hard. Or if, it might be coming up too, where like, if I'm not kind of really worrying about making friends in college, I wouldn't sign up for the group chat of the new freshmen coming in. And, so they sort of pair caring, motivation, other character traits with worry.
Right. I think parents sometimes get concerned about this. I work with a lot of parents of young adults, and they'll be like, they're not nervous. Like, this must be they're not worried, and although there is a contagion effect around stress around applying to college and the whole college application experience, I don't think we need to pathologize if we're not worrying. It means that we don't care about something or that we're unmotivated.
Yeah.
It might be, which again, we're hoping we can get people to this place that like people realize it's really not effective. It's not decreasing my anxiety or stress level when I engage in this thinking pattern. And it's not something within my control. And maybe, for those parents, maybe your child is really focusing on things that are in the present moment that are within their control.
Right. No, beautifully said. I'll keep going because I have nothing to add. That was just perfect. Chef's kiss. If I worry, it means that I'm a caring, thoughtful person. So this might feel a little bit more relevant to a parent who's trying to help their teen or their high school senior tolerate what's going on with them right now. Sort of like, okay, I care, so let me just get in there with them. I'm assuming that if I had a magic wand and I could take away your worry, you would still very much love and support your teen going through this.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I have a funny story about this. This just shows sort of a little tidbit into my early life, but my high school boyfriend, this sweet person named Ben. Hi, Ben. I don't know where you are now, but he had moved. He was kind of doing a gap year. So I didn't know his family or anything. And he always explained like, oh, my mom, she'd never ever, no, she wasn't a worrier. He had just come from some bike, motorcycle trip across the world. And I was thinking, there is no way that my mom would ever let me do a bicycle trip. And I just remember thinking at the time, wait, so she lets you do all this kind of stuff and she doesn't worry. So she doesn't love you.
Right.
Did you not feel loved? And it turns out he did feel loved. And she was wonderfully caring, and she had 5 children whom she adored. She just didn't connect worry and love. And so that was my first window into like, oh, you can actually really feel loved and be loving without fretting. And so that's just one way that I think we can try to separate, again, characteristics of a person or dynamics between a relationship. Worry is mutually exclusive from those. It is an emotional and ruminative state.
Yeah. It doesn't mean you're careless and thoughtless just because you aren't categorized as a worrier.
Yeah. Right. These last two, I think, are really relevant to this part of the, so worry prevents negative feelings down the road. What that really means is, okay, sort of what those catastrophic thinking. It's like, if I think about every outcome, then I'm going to be emotionally prepared if I don't get in. The truth is, what actually happens is if you don't get in to your top choice, you will be disappointed. You will feel sad, frustrated. You will feel like a sense of injustice, all the feelings you would feel. You can't not feel those because you've coped ahead. They're going to come. They should come. You've worked hard. And you will be able to handle it in that moment. And it's going to have to kind of go through its natural path. What happens when people worry ahead of time is they're actually more emotionally exhausted.
Yeah.
And when the time comes and they still feel disappointed, they're like, well, I don't deserve this. I've already, So I really want to caution people. And I think it's a good thing to remember, like, oh, wait, worrying ahead of time, if that's something you buy into without realizing it, check that a little bit, because it's useless. It's useless worry. It doesn't have a function.
Yeah. It's kind of like, I'm sure you've heard this from a lot of teenagers. They're like, I would almost rather expect to fail and be pleasantly surprised that I did well. And I think that mentality, I see that a lot with high school seniors, but I think you're right. It's like, think of the emotional cost that leading up to, again, you've sent these applications in October and you might not find out till April. That's 6 months of your life that you're going to predict these negative outcomes and think in some way it's going to provide relief when you're right. Like, regardless of the outcome, you're still going to have an emotional reaction to it.
Right.
So.
Right. You're going to be happy if you got in, regardless of if you told yourself you wouldn't. Like, again, we don't have that. We don't have like an emotional switch. We can be like, I'm going to turn it on here and turn it off here. It's going to sort of happen. Worry prevents future negative outcomes. And this is similar to superstition.
Yes.
And I think it can kind of range, plenty of people do some superstitious activities. I know athletes, it just feels like part of the game, et cetera. However, there are a lot of times when I think people worry truly as a way to assume that they can change the future. I was reading Bossy Pants. This is years ago by Tina Fey. And she actually had a perfect example of this. I should reread the chapter because she's obviously funnier than I am. But she was describing being on a plane and she hated to fly. I think it was for her honeymoon, which is why she was willing to do it. And she looked around at all the people on the plane and she was like, do they not understand that my neurotic anxiety about this flight crashing is actually physically holding the plane in the air? And if I weren't worried about it, the plane would be crashing, right? So It's obviously a joke to say, clearly worry is not going to create or have any influence in outcome, people's reactions to things. Yeah. So if you think about it, it makes sense. But the truth is oftentimes we're not. We're kind of just, buying into little superstitions without paying attention.
Right. And it gives you this illusion of safety when in reality you're just tolerating uncertainty.
Right. So one thing that is a really helpful and pretty quick, useful exercise is to start to differentiate between actual worry or hypothetical worry. All right. And we thought it kind of be fun to do a little bit of a pop quiz for people. Actually, Liz, pop quiz.
Okay.
Now that's cheating. You know the answers. So are these actual or hypothetical? So you can read. We're not going to read these for you necessarily, but what you can see is that, I'm stressed about college decisions versus I'll never get into the right college. Which one feels more actual versus hypothetical? Right. So stressed, it's happening currently. It fits the facts of the situation. There's some evidence. I have a physical reaction in my body. I can feel tension, right? So it's happening now, versus I'll never get in is a hypothetical. I'm going to lose it if I fail. I'm going to just totally lose it. Or if I don't get into the college of my choice, I'm never going to be happy. There's only one outcome for me, and that is if I get into it. I will not be able to handle final season in college is different than like, whoa, I'm going to have to really, I know my test taking abilities and final season is coming up. Right. So why do we care?
Yeah. Can I say really quickly, Sarah, something I think is helpful here? Because oftentimes, even myself, we can kind of generate some sneaky evidence. I'm using some air quotes here, to make ourselves believe that it's actual.
Yeah.
And I think that if you say to yourself, in the here and now, do I actually have any evidence through my senses? So again, we all know what our senses are. And if we don't, then it's likely hypothetical worry. So, example, like, you actually having evidence in this moment, right? That you have 5 finals tomorrow and the last exams that you took were really challenging and that they're on the calendar, you can kind of confidently say, okay, final seasons is coming up and I have 5, you can say those facts. But a lot of the hypotheticals that you put here are not observed through our senses. They're kind of future predictions that we're making.
Right. And there's also this sense of, I get this a lot where people confuse the word hypothetical with potentially feasible.
Yeah.
Right. They're like, well, it's possible that I won't get into college. I'm like, well, I know it's not like, I'm saying aliens could land on this planet and you might not get into college. So no, like it's more like that is not happening in this very moment.
Right.
It's not the only outcome that can happen. Right. Or it might be something that is happening in the future. Right. Sometimes people are like, I'm worried about finals. And I'll be like, well, hold on. That's not, it's kind of a hypothetical at this moment. Finals exist and they are going to come up. And I'm like, but it's January. So, so I'm not saying it's never going to happen. I live in the reality of this world, but hypothetical is different than like potentially feasible.
Right.
And why do we care? Well, if we go through the various steps of this, then if we identify actual versus hypothetical, you might need some skills to really help you cope in that moment. And knowing whether it's actual or hypothetical is going to lead you to the right skill. And it could be, honestly, I think of it as sometimes just having the label can be all you need. Oh, wait, this is a hypothetical. Sometimes that's enough.
Yeah.
Sometimes if it's really big and it's kind of taking over, you might need to engage in the skills that you see, which is to challenge the worry or the thoughts that are coming up, set a schedule for the worry, or let the thought go in some way. We're going to go through all of these because I know that's probably not really clear right now. If it's an actual problem, then you can problem solve. Like suddenly your worry can be put to use. You know, you're no longer a hamster on the wheel. You can get off and you can use your hands, your mouth, your legs, your muscles. You know, you can use things in your actual power and control to figure out a solution. It doesn't always mean there's a good solution or you like all the solutions, but that you can do something about it. And oftentimes you might have a problem where you can't do something about it, in which case there's some, distress tolerance skills or some acceptance skills that you might need to put into place.
Yeah, I think that I often say to a lot of my clients now, you can get to problem solving once you know where you got into. You know,
right.
That's when you actually can be worried because like you'll be able to like list all the facts of the schools and all the factors, but right now you don't have all the information. So don't try to problem solve yet when you haven't even identified what the problem is.
Right. And you actually don't know the range of your solutions yet.
Yes.
But let's take one that would actually come up. Let's say someone has not gotten into their top choice, right? They now have the information in front of them. So now you can problem solve, right? Then you can say, okay, what's the problem? Well, we just gave you the answer. I didn't get into my top choice.
Nice. Yep.
It's not to say that, okay, you're going to problem solve and you're just going to feel really wonderful afterwards, but now you can start to brainstorm solutions. And that is where you might have to take some time and space to widen your sort of ideas of what would look good and to say, okay, what are some solutions? Okay, I could maybe take a gap year. I could reapply. I can start to visit the other schools I did get into. You know, there's all sorts of things. I'm sure you've had so many conversations. Yeah, I think between the two of us, how many times have we worked with people through various outcomes here, right?
Yeah, right.
So
I think the brainstorming solution sounds so like simple, but the two things that, because I think people get really stuck here and then they basically are like, my life's over, you know, they like really freak out.
Right.
And I think the two things that I would ask people to think about, and even parents, because I think parents are really attached. You know, I have a student right now that didn't get into, you know, a legacy school that the parents really thought that their kid was going to go to, is to be non-judgmental about potential solutions and to be willing. Like you have to kind of be willing to accept that there might be some other solutions to consider and to be not really judgmental towards them. When you're brainstorming something, you're just throwing things out there. None of them have to stick and you don't have to necessarily go in those directions. But sometimes there's a lack of acceptance that they're even in the situation in the first place.
Right. And you might need to take some space. Like I wouldn't I wouldn't say like, get the decision and then immediately problem solve. You're probably going to have to take some time and space to grieve and be mad and let your emotions sort of be an emotion mind for a little bit. That's there. Take it, you know. And then when you're able to come back and are in a place to start to brainstorm solutions, what we know happens, especially for people who are anxious or who are, you know, maybe prone to depression, is instead of problem solving, they might, you know, sometimes what can happen is they identify the problem and then they might come up with solutions, but they judge it right away as not possible. Right. And so here's a solution, too hard. Here's a solution. Nope, too easy. Here's a solution. Can't do it. Right. Won't work. And so they're not really problem solving. They're ruminating. That's back to that sort of hamster wheel. So brainstorming solutions really is putting literally everything on the docket. And I always like to say, hey, put some stuff on there that might sound a little nuts. Like call the school and ream them out. Right. I think that's technically a solution. And guess what? Some people do it. So, so put some stuff on there that you feel like you really want to do. that would make you in the moment, might feel good in the short term. And then and I also say, if you're not writing it out, you're probably skipping some steps.
Yeah.
Especially when you're starting to learn this at first, if you're not going through step by step, your brain is going to be too quick to go into some of those old habits. Mm-hmm. So just pen and paper or typing it out, then list out those pros and cons to say, okay, what are the benefits of this? And what are the risks of this? What short-term might feel good? Yeah. What long-term might feel good? So it's kind of like zoom out and think through that in various ways. And be willing to admit that sometimes the quote unquote bad solutions, right, that people sort of immediately as the list is bad, there's a reason why people do them.
Yeah.
It does release some immediate emotion at times, or it can feel like, I'm just going to forget it. I'm not going to go to college. I'm going to, just work at home. It's like, okay, that does solve a certain problem. It takes away future hard work or future disappointment. So allow yourself to really think through why some of those solutions do come to mind, and don't label them as good and bad, but just a mix of short-term and long-term benefits and consequences. Mm-hmm. I will say this next one, I know you talk about as a DBT therapist with problem solving, is how do you do the one that also feels like you? Mm-hmm. What are your longer term values and goals? What's the one that just feels more like you? Because sometimes that's hard to list out in the pro and con.
Yeah. College is like such a good, I always use this as a teaching example, even, like 11-year-old clients that I work with, who are already, by the way, worrying about college.
Yeah. Mine's like, I don't know if I'm going to get into MIT. And I'm like, probably not. So
that, I think when we pay attention to our values or goals, it helps us sometimes like integrate a lot of the information about how we feel and about the facts regarding the situation, Mm-hmm. And I think it's that's really what we're hoping as parents, as outside therapists. I'm helping my client make a decision that in their gut and their intuition, they know is their truth about where they should go. But incorporating a lot of information into that, how the feeling they get on campus versus, how far away it is from home or how much money they're getting for the school.
Yeah. Right. I could talk about this one all day, but I know we want to get to the next slide. So I will say that just to finish this up, once you've picked your solution, try it out, right? You have no idea. You don't have a crystal ball whether it's going to work or not, but try it. Just go for it. See what happens. If it doesn't work, it does not mean you chose the wrong solution. It might mean that you didn't have enough information at the time, and now you have new information. Right. What did you learn? Is there another solution you hadn't thought of before you could go back to? Or is there another solution you did think of, but you thought, okay, maybe I'm more willing to try it now. So then, of course, now we're talking about the hypothetical worry. I have the clouds on here for a reason, right? I think a lot of times people try very hard to control their worry, just as effective, I guess, as us trying to control how quickly a cloud moves through the sky. It's going to do what it's going to do, right? So let's go through some of the 3 C's. Liz, I'm going to let you talk about this because, in fairness, you're the one who taught me these 3 C's.
Okay. So the 3 C's is really a skill when you are aware that your thinking is causing you to have negative emotions. And the goal is, can I find a different way to view the situation that might alleviate, some anxiety or sadness, whatever the emotion is that you're experiencing. The 3 C's I love because it's a really quick thing to memorize. And of course, it's applicable to a lot of factors around college, whether it's the getting in uncertainty. Once you get in, did I make the right choice? To what's it going to be like when I step foot on campus? But the first step is you have to be aware that you actually have a negative thought, and you have to catch it and identify what that thought is. Now, preface this that Sarah said something earlier, and I really can't express this enough. I think this is something parents can do with their kids. Obviously, teens, I would encourage you to do it. Is that when we have thoughts and they're in our head, they feel really true. And having a piece of paper and going through these steps and actually writing them out helps us get some distance from our thinking. That I really do think that when you're first learning and trying to practice this, it's much more effective to do it on paper than to try to do it in your head. Of course, over time, when you've mastered the skill, it's much easier to do in your head. But the first step is, okay, can I catch my negative thought? So let's say my negative thought is, I'm never going to get into any of the schools that I want to go to, right? That's my negative thought. My second step is I'm going to have to check how accurate is this thought. Now, this step is really important because, like I said before, our brain tends to tell us that facts are facts and evidence when they really aren't. So when I say you're going to check your thought to see how accurate it is, I really want you to imagine you're in the court of law and you're presenting evidence to a judge. And evidence that you present in the court of law, again, is observable through our senses. So if it is not observable, like I had a video camera and I could kind of, see the whole thing play out, then it likely is an imagined, fact. It's not necessarily true. So in this example, okay, I have the negative thought. I've caught it. I'm never going to get into any schools that I like. And now I'm going to check it to see how accurate is that thought. So ask yourself questions like, what evidence do I have to suggest that this thought is true? This is a really good scenario because you really don't have factual evidence because it hasn't happened yet. You haven't gotten any rejections yet to support that thought, right? Now, you could say that there is, I don't know, a lot of college students would be like, well, Liz, like the acceptance rates for the school or blah, blah, blah. And they go through all those facts. And even that to me is not certainty because there's variables that get people into school that are not just based upon your SAT scores and GPA that are more subjective in my experience. So you're in general, though, overestimating the probability or likelihood that really worst case scenario, that outcome is going to happen. And in this example, when you check it, is this accurate? You don't have any actual facts or evidence to suggest that you're not going to get into any of the schools that you want to go to.
Yeah.
And so then the last step is, how do we change it to be more realistic? Now I'm going to stop here because I think some people, when they're learning the 3 C's, they think that you're just going to be positive. And that is not necessarily the case. You've already predicted the worst case scenario, which is like the most negative outcome. I don't want you to predict the most positive outcome either. I just want you to be balanced or more realistic, which would be, what's like a coping thought, a more realistic thought? What would you say to your friend if they were thinking this way? You would never say to your friend, like, yeah, bud, you're never getting to any of the schools you like, right? But you probably wouldn't be like, oh my gosh, you're totally going to get into every school that you like. You wouldn't be like, incredibly. You would say something like, it's going to be okay. It's going to work out. You'll probably get into some of the schools that you want to go to.
Right.
So again, 3 C's is just catch, check, change, and writing them out is a really helpful strategy, I think.
Right. I agree that sometimes people just assume like that suddenly you're just supposed to go from being like a total pessimist to a total optimist. And what we're saying is, no, it's more like, just let's be a realist. Like there's a lot of different ways things can happen. And we're not saying like, oh, everything's going to be rosy. But it's some of the questions we have here that might help you think about ways to change it. Is there another way it could work out? Liz, you already mentioned, would a friend see this differently, with a little bit more, meaning a little bit more objectively and a little bit more compassionately, right? All right. So you can also try to push that into your own way of talking to yourself. What's leading me, my emotions or my logic? Sometimes even if the other day I was just having a rough day, and I knew I was having a rough day and I knew I wasn't really being the most logical person. And I also knew it was just my emotions leading me. Did it make me feel happy? No, but at least I wasn't like, oh, hopeless. This is going to be this way forever. I was sort of like, all right, so what do I need to do? I need to probably slow down, maybe, not rev up myself. I'm a little burnt out, et cetera. So if it's, your emotions are leading you, it doesn't mean you can automatically turn your logic on every time. But it also might mean you can start to engage in maybe a little more self-care or being a little bit more graceful with yourself. Am I only seeing a black or white outcome, right? Like, okay, you've already talked about the worst. And we also said it's not like we think, oh, it's always either going to be the best or the worst, but
Right.
what is a wide range of options in between? This next one,
So
I also
important.
think what happens too is like, are you underestimating your ability to handle things?
Mm-hmm.
The truth is, even though you've never done this hard thing before, you've probably dealt with disappointment before. Your kids have probably dealt with disappointment before. The way that they handled that, you know, they've probably learned from and have other ways of coping and new ways of coping, or perhaps already handled something really with a sense of resilience. So, you know, this idea of like, I'm going to just freak out. It's like, well, hold on, you know, pay attention to your own sense of strength if something difficult happens. And this last one is this thought helping you, hurting you, or keeping you stuck, I think is the most helpful for those ones that you can't always answer. And we're going to talk more about that because ultimately there's plenty of times where these sort of change it questions might feel like, well, I actually don't have an easy answer, in which case you can start to think a bit more about that piece of it. So we'll come back to that. Liz, you already mentioned this idea of when can you start to problem solve this? And so I think this is another one where, especially when people start to get into maybe not a debate, but they're like, this could happen, you know, it's a potential. And I'm like, yeah, it's 50-50. I'm, you know, is I say, okay, hold on. Instead of us arguing about whether it's hypothetical or actual, that might not be as helpful. When do you know you'll start to be able to problem solve? Right. So you will be able to, I'm going to skip that first one for a second.
Yeah.
Especially for this one, but you will at some point on April 15th or whatever that day is.
Yeah.
You will be able to problem solve this. And until that, can we agree that worrying isn't doing anything for you? Or if it's not a date, what things have to happen first before you can problem solve? So maybe it's, you know, your roommate. Are you going to get along with your roommate? Okay. Well, what things would need to happen for you to know that that's not going on? Okay. We need to have a pretty consistent, you know, so you start to make a list of things that would need to happen. Or a date when you can start to problem solve. Another thing that can happen is sometimes if you start to worry and some of these skills aren't happening, if you say, all right, I can feel myself ruminating, but I've got 30 minutes and I'm just going to give myself a set limit of time, put a parentheses around it, and I'm going to come back to it. It's just a gentle pushing away of the worry, a gentle kind of distract and return to your task at hand that you need to be focused on, so that you can say, all right, yes, I can see myself getting into a frenzy at 6:30 today. I'm going to get like a snack, or I'm going to have some dinner, have something to eat or something. And I'm just going to really let it fly. I'm going to worry then. And then sometimes that can help you kind of snap out of that rumination.
Yeah. And I would say for parents too, that we know life is busy with usually multiple children and working. And then this applying to college is like a full-time job, for parents and teens. So I even think I always suggest to families that are going through this process, scheduling time to worry together and like talk about or problem solve.
Yeah.
Because I think what ends up happening is one of either the parents or the child is worried and they try to start talking and communicating about the problem when emotions are running really high. And so even being able to do that, okay, can we set aside a time where maybe our emotions won't be as high and we might be able to like more clearly kind of see the problem. Maybe the parent's prepared and has a list of, the 5 factors for each school that we're going to like rank and rate or something like that, or an Excel spreadsheet that has all the data around certain things when, you're actually sitting down to decide certain things about where you're going and what your college experience is going to look like.
I completely agree. I also have just noticing we've got some great questions coming up. So the first one is, how can we incorporate some of this language into our daily lives? And I think that instead of going through like specific skills, I think that psychologists are sometimes a little guilty of having like psychology speak and it sounds lame.
Right.
And I found that when people can put it in their own language, so when I'm talking to folks, I'll say like, okay, here are kind of the steps but do I really think you're going to go up to a friend and talk like this? Or do I really think you're going to go up to your child and say, let's write out the steps to problem solving? Sure, but it might not feel so genuine. And I will ask people, what's a way to put this in your own language? So here's sort of the skills, but what's a way what do you feel like feels like more you to say it? Or a lot of times just a quick shortcut. So instead of going through the whole list of things, I might be like, okay, okay, check it, or 3 C's, so that it becomes shorthand for a longer skill. I don't know if you found ways, because I do think that is a good way, a good question in many ways.
Yeah.
Like, how can you take some kind of complex psychological things that sound a little bit, esoteric, and then put it into your own, like a quick concrete way to
I would say
yourself.
Yeah, I would say there's certain words that are more palatable to having teenagers that don't sound too therapist-y. So like even something as simple, like let's say your teen comes to you and they're really in this vicious worry cycle, even highlighting like, is this helpful or unhelpful to you right now? Or your observations, like I'm noticing, or even like self-disclosing, I notice when I do this, right, I actually feel worse, right? Or, the terms around unhelpful, helpful, effective or not effective. Most seniors in high school are looking to have fun. I mean, that's really what their goal is. They want to graduate.
Yeah.
They want to have fun. It's like the last hurrah. So I think if I was a parent going through this, I would want to coach you on like helping them understand that's their goal. Yes, they want to get into a good school and the school they want to go to, and they still want to enjoy their senior year. So is thinking like this helpful or unhelpful, or effective or ineffective in terms of reaching that goal? And then the other skills, like if your child is not familiar with them, and it is something I always say, like the best way that you can incorporate this in daily life is to model using them. So when you are worried, there's still applications that could be getting sent out, like worried, did everything get submitted the right way, et cetera? Or you might worry out loud to your child. Catch yourself doing it and kind of model to them. You might not go through all the steps of the 3 C's, but you might kind of say like, I was like thinking really extreme ways, like it's going to be okay. Like whatever ends up happening, you'll get into the school that's a good fit for you, really modeling these kind of coping statements that are rooted in reality versus this land of imagination where our anxiety can kind of take us to.
Right. I think if you're sitting down with your teen and you're like, okay, let's write down some problem solving, their eyes might glaze over. Fair. So you could also start to just do, I think almost like sprinkle it in, like lay little seeds here and there. So if they are like, I'm not going to study tonight, you're like, I know. Okay. Yeah. On the one hand, I know you're exhausted. On the other hand, it might be harder for the next couple of days. So just sort of sprinkle in like a pro con, kind of talk out loud about it. Or if you have, to your point, when you model something, if they say like, they start to worry a lot, you might be like, oh my gosh, yeah, I remember I used to get really emotional. My worry used to totally take me all kinds of places.
Right.
When I was in that position, it's so hard. Right. So that's just you don't even have to go through it. It's just more, it's labeling it for them and just sort of helping them say, oh, it's not a thought. My worry thoughts also used to do that. So I think that's sometimes just the quickest way for parents to do it, because we know that there's, again, if they're not having a fun moment, they might not be worried, and they're going to be like, I don't want to talk about that right now. So it's a little tricky. It can be tricky,
and this is also where I think sometimes I'm not a fan of like indirect communication, but like I always tell parents, you can always go back via text. Like you have a conversation, your child's kind of worried about something. Maybe they're not really hearing you, but like that might be an opportunity. You could really provide a balanced way of viewing a situation via text. And your child might read it later or look at it and see things in a different way than when they're in the heat of the moment worrying to you.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to wrap up here, but I think that this is probably the hardest.
Yeah.
And
So useful.
Potentially the most useful. So I ask people just keep an open mind, and similar to what we just said before, sometimes it's not about like, this isn't something we're going to sit down and be able to practice it and learn a skill and keep going. It's something that takes a lot of practice over time. So, but the idea behind letting a thought go, a lot of times people think that means pushing it away. So I think of thoughts as a wave. It's almost like a Goldilocks situation, right? You don't want to hold on to it too tight so that you're ruminating in it, which is what we've been talking about. But sometimes people distract so much and they avoid the thoughts so much, which is also problematic. And we know trying to suppress thoughts actually keeps them strong and powerful. So the idea is like, if you think about a wave, how much control do you have on how big the wave is? How much zero control. And actually thoughts are pretty similar, right? So if you think of them as like, oh, whoa, this is like really big right now, I'm just going to kind of watch and see what happens. A lot of times when you don't try actively to hold on and problem solve and all that kind of stuff, but you also don't try to like shift it away and be like, go away. And you're just kind of like, whoa, that's a big thought. They fizzle. We have 80 to 90,000 thoughts a day. You know, they're going to come and go. And the other one is just to label it as a thought. Like I said before, it's like, oh yeah, I used to have a lot of worry thoughts like that. It's very quick. It's very simple. Does it suddenly make you feel better? No, but a lot of times nothing's going to suddenly make you feel better. Yeah. It's about starting to learn just to have a different relationship with how much you're buying into them. So just being like, if they're coming and being like, I'm going to fail this test. Yeah. Oh my gosh, that thought is so big. I know you're having that really crazy thought that you're going to fail the test. It's subtle. But
yeah, this is where I always say, if you could remember one thing in my office, I'm like, buckle up. It's one sentence, 4 words. I'm like, guys, seriously, get your notes section out on your phone. It's that thoughts are not facts. And if you really develop that mantra, that this is what this skill is telling you, that we have so many thoughts all the time. And what gets us stuck in terms of our ability to get through our day or have confidence to get through our day is when we're treating every thought that pops up into our brain as factual. Yeah. And if we can kind of recognize that they're not, and our thought that it is a fact is, again, just another thought, and use some of these skills that I think, Sarah, you're talking about to kind of get some distance or change our relationship with our thoughts. So helpful with tolerating uncertainty.
Yeah, it's the one that I use the most. That's sometimes the hardest. Again, a couple of these are a little bit, they can sound silly, but again, don't knock it till you tried it. Having some way to animate the thought. I don't mean like graphic design. I mean, having some way to give some other sense or description to the thought. Like, sometimes if I'm working with someone, they'll be in the office and they'll just be going and I can't get a word in because they're like, they're just spilling their guts. And I'll be like, okay, hold on. Write as you go. And they start to type it out. I'll be like, okay, what's the font? Change the font. What's the color of it? Oh, okay. It's red. All right, great. What is the, what does it look like? Sans serif? No, it's not Comic Sans. No, it's like the monstery, one. And it's amazing how after like in a little bit, and I'll switch into use humor, like so quick how quickly we're laughing or being silly. And there's nothing that depowers worry faster than laughter. Because the two cannot be happening at the same time. You can't be serious and giggly at the same time.
Yeah.
So I don't know if there's ways. I mean, I have people. One person had an OCD thought actually that he was going bald. He wasn't. He had the fullest head of hair. He went to the dermatologist. The dermatologist confirmed it. And I said, well, let's just try something different. We came up with the idea that he was going to use like the Cartman from South Park voice. Every time he had the thought, he was just going to say it in that ridiculous voice. And I said, let's just see what happens. And we'll come back to it, but just start there. And he came back. He's like, I can't even take the thought seriously. The minute I start saying it. And that was all we did. He did not need another. I mean, other thoughts have to use, are more difficult, but laughter is great medicine.
Yeah. I mean, of course, saying the thought out loud, how many times has anyone ever said to you like, oh gosh, I feel so silly, like saying this now, because you get some knowledge and awareness. But someone gave an extra gift to one of my kids, like a voice changer.
Yeah.
And in my office, I'll have clients like say the thought that they're worried about through the voice changer. And yeah, it just, again, it kind of
You
shifts.
can't. Yeah.
You can. It's like, oh my gosh.
You can't take it seriously.
Yeah.
Right. I have a phone app where you can like use a mouth and they'll be just, and they're just like, put it down. I'm like, no, we're going to do it. I mean, so we get really silly. For time's sake, we're going to go through some of this quickly because I do want to get to some questions that we have, but finding a helpful image or metaphor. If the way the metaphor works for you, great. I have some people who said, I like to kind of imagine they were hikers, so like, I like to imagine like different animals, and so if you can find an image, like if some of these things aren't working for you, just kind of find an image that feels good. The reason I put up a balloon is one of my clients loved the idea. I was just like, look, it's almost like you've got this big thing of balloons coming by as these thoughts, like the guy in Up, like you take the house away.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's all these thoughts and all the balloons are like dark and gray and have all sorts of horrible thoughts in them. And instead of just watching them go, you latch on and you let them take you away.
Yeah.
So we had the image of like, all right, but you actually can just let go and watch them go away. And that worked for her, right?
Yeah.
Because it was like, you're making the choice to grab. You don't have to. The balloons are still there, but they'll go. So finding a helpful metaphor. Also zooming out. So much of our worry happens either in like the distant, past or the future, but kind of zoom out and be like, okay, hold on. I got a whole life to live here. I'm sort of like focused in this one little, let me zoom out. I got a whole world around me. No matter where I go to college, I will have friends. I will have X, Y, and Z. Like there's a lot about a person that has nothing to do with where they go to college. Like you're going to be you wherever you're at.
Right.
And then last but not least is if it feels too much and you've tried all these things and it's just too much, gentle and brief distractions. If it's stubborn, be like, okay, I'm going to try to do a crossword puzzle. I'm going to do something else with my mind that I can't do that and worry at the same time. I can't do the spelling bee on the New York Times app and also worry, so give yourself some ways to just kind of get yourself out of it. And you might have to come back to that a few times.
And I think that's where parents can also be helpful too, like helping, when you see your teen is stuck, I think sometimes parents are trying to change the way that they think and help them think logically. And maybe it might just be a fact of like, hey, why don't we go walk the dog real quick for a little bit? You seem like you seem a little overwhelmed. And like maybe at some point during the walk, they might be in a place to kind of think about things differently.
Right. It's kind of scoop them up. Oh, like I'm going to go let's get some ice cream, like this. So questions, and we've gotten a couple, so I'll start to answer that now. One we have is going back to the problem solving action. What is a small problem solving action that you can take as a parent? So part of it, maybe we already answered a little bit, which is what are some things that you can say in the moment in little ways, like show little mini problem solvings that you can do. The other part is problem solving can be big and small in terms of content. When I'm talking to little kids about this, I have two little stuffed monkeys on a table and I say, oh, they want to play with each other. And how do we problem solve this? Right? Like problem solving can be, what do I have for breakfast? It doesn't have to be like, what do I do if I don't get into the school I want? So I think that just starting to model small, for things that might not feel as, like as big and heavy can be easy ways to just get into the habit of some of these skills. I don't know, Liz, that's
well, I also think like parents, I mean, I know it's always so hard because sometimes teens independently want to make choices around the college, decision-making process, which that's probably a whole other webinar, how to navigate some of those differing opinions. But I say parents always be brainstorming. You know what I mean? Like it's overwhelming. You can be like the fact finder. You can have all the information, the researcher around certain factors that sometimes might help guide your family and your child to make a decision. I had a parent recently that like found some like stats around like alumni associations and like job placement. And like, those were just like some things that their child like didn't want to do. Right. But it ended up being like between two schools that were really comparable, they ended up making their choice on where they're going to go to school based upon this information that the parents found. So I think parents kind of brainstorming and being prepared to kind of have solutions to kind of offer or have some facts or evidence that maybe your child hasn't thought about that you can offer if they're willing to be collaborative.
Yeah. And kind of help them see that there's probably pros and cons to any decision, even if it feels like there's a clear choice, right? So, well, Liz, you have been so gracious with your time.
Thank you, Sarah, for having me.
Yes, no. So I guess I'll see you. But in the meantime, if anyone out there wants to find out more, whether it's through academic information and trainings or certainly treatments, Lumate is here to help improve the lives of youth, children, teens, and young adults. So please feel free to scan this QR code and reach out to us. We have lots to offer. But for now, I'm just so excited that I got to have a fun collaboration with a friend and colleague. So be seeing ya.
See you soon, Sarah. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.